Little girl tells CEO's paralyzed son a hug for your leftovers, and he walks for the first time. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type HOPE in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The February wind cut through Hazel's threadbare jacket like ice-cold daggers as she crouched behind the dumpster outside Romano's fine dining. At 7 years old, she had learned that Tuesday evenings yielded the best leftovers, untouched bread rolls, half-eaten steaks, and sometimes even dessert that wealthy patrons barely touched. Her stomach growled fiercely, reminding her that yesterday's single meal of donated soup was already a distant memory. Through the restaurant's gleaming windows, she watched families laugh and clink crystal glasses, their faces warm under golden chandeliers. The contrast between their world and hers felt like staring across an impossible canyon. Her mother, Sarah, was working her second job today, stocking shelves at a grocery store until 11 p.m. They lived in a cramped studio apartment in a transitional housing complex. But even that was better than the homeless shelter they'd called home just 8 months ago, Hazel's attention fixed on a particular table near the window. A man in an expensive navy suit sat rigidly across from a small boy in a wheelchair. The man's jaw was tense, his dark hair streaked with premature grey, and his watch probably cost more than her mother made in 2 months. But it was the boy who captured her heart. The child was about her age, maybe 6 years old, with sandy brown hair that fell across his forehead. His legs lay still under a warm blanket, and his hands rested carefully on the wheelchair's armrests. What struck Hazel most was his expression, a sadness that seemed too heavy for such a young face. While other children his age would be squirming in their seats or coloring on placemats, this boy sat perfectly still, staring at his untouched chicken nuggets with empty eyes. The man, clearly the boy's father, kept checking his phone and glancing around the restaurant with barely contained impatience. A server approached their table, offering to heat the boy's food, but the child just shook his head slightly without looking up. His father sighed and returned to his phone, typing rapidly. Hazel pressed closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. Something about this scene pulled at her chest, a recognition of loneliness that transcended their vastly different circumstances. She knew what it felt like to sit quietly while the world moved around you, to feel like you were behind glass even when you were right there with people. The restaurant's back door suddenly swung open, startling Hazel from her observation. Tony, the kind cook who sometimes saved day-old bread for kids in the neighborhood, emerged carrying bags of garbage. "Hey there, little one," Tony called softly, spotting her immediately. "Cold night to be out here." Hazel stood up slowly, brushing snow from her jacket. Tony had never made her feel ashamed for needing help, which made him different from most adults. "Hi, Mr. Tony. Is there maybe some bread tonight?" Tony's weathered face softened. "Actually, we had a cancelled order. Whole kid's meal got returned untouched." He disappeared briefly and returned with a warm container. Chicken nuggets, apple slices, and rolls, still hot. "Thank you so much," Hazel whispered, accepting the container like precious treasure. "You eating enough these days, kiddo? Your mama still working multiple jobs?" Hazel nodded. "She's trying really hard." "Things have been better since we got the apartment." Good. Listen, it's supposed to get down to 20 degrees tonight. You make sure you and your mum stay warm, okay?" As Tony headed back inside, Hazel carefully opened the container. The wonderful aroma of seasoned chicken made her mouth water instantly. She was about to take a bite when movement in the restaurant caught her eye. The boy had turned his wheelchair slightly toward the window and was looking in her direction. Their eyes met through the glass, 2 children from different worlds, both carrying something heavy. In that moment, Hazel saw something flicker in the boy's expression. Not quite curiosity, but a tiny spark of recognition, like he understood something about sitting on the outside looking in. She raised her hand in a small wave, careful not to drop her precious container of food. To her surprise, the boy lifted his hand from his armrest, a slow, deliberate gesture that seemed to take effort. He pressed his palm against the window from the inside. Hazel stepped closer and pressed her palm against the outside of the glass, directly opposite his. For just a moment, only the thin barrier of glass separated their hands, and somehow the cold night felt a little less lonely. The boy's father noticed the interaction and moved to the window, his expression concerned but not angry. When he spotted Hazel, his face showed surprise rather than disapproval. He said something to his son, and the boy turned back to look at her one more time before they began preparing to leave. As they moved toward the restaurant's exit, Hazel saw the father wheel his son toward the front door. Something made her gather her courage and walk around to the front of the building, still clutching her warm container. They emerged just as she reached the sidewalk. Up close, she could see that the boy's eyes were blue-green and very sad, but not unfriendly. His father was younger than she'd thought, maybe the same age as her mom, but he carried himself like someone much older. "Hello," the man said carefully, clearly unsure of the appropriate response to finding a child alone on a freezing night. "Are you? Is someone coming to pick you up?" "I live nearby," Hazel said truthfully, though nearby was relative. "I was just getting dinner." She held up the container. The boy spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but clear. "That smells really good. I didn't want to eat mine." "Connor," his father said gently, "we should let this young lady get home where it's warm." "It's okay," Hazel said, looking directly at Connor. "I'm not in a hurry. My mum doesn't get home till late anyway." Something in her matter-of-fact tone seemed to resonate with Connor. "My dad and I eat out a lot because our house feels too quiet." The father, Marcus, Hazel would later learn, looked surprised by his son's unexpected openness with a stranger. "I'm Hazel," she said, sitting down on a nearby bench so she was closer to Connor's eye level. "Are you Connor?" He nodded. "Why were you behind the restaurant?" "Sometimes they have extra food for kids who need it. Mr. Tony is really nice." Connor considered this. "Are you hungry a lot?" "Connor," Marcus started to interrupt, but Hazel answered honestly, "Sometimes, but it's better now than it used to be. My mom works really hard." "My legs don't work," Connor said suddenly, as if offering an equivalent truth. "They got hurt in a car crash." "That must be really scary and sad," Hazel responded, with the simple empathy that children often possess naturally. "Yeah, and boring. I can't run around or play most games." Hazel thought about this seriously. "But you can still do friend things, like talking and sharing food and, well, I don't know what you like to do." I used to like building with Legos and reading stories." "Those sound like good things. I like drawing, but I don't have many crayons right now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two children finding unexpected connection in their honest acknowledgement of difficult circumstances. Marcus watched this interaction with growing amazement. Connor hadn't engaged in conversation with anyone outside their immediate circle since the accident. Yet here he was, talking naturally with this homeless child as if they were old friends. "We should probably get going," Marcus said finally, though he seemed reluctant to interrupt. "It's getting colder." "Will you come back to this restaurant?" Hazel asked Connor. "Maybe. Will you?" "Probably. Mr. Tony helps me sometimes." As Marcus began pushing Connor's wheelchair toward their car, Connor twisted around to look back at Hazel. "I hope your mom gets home safe tonight," he called. "I hope you get to build something with Legos," Hazel called back. Marcus loaded Connor into their Mercedes SUV, but before driving away, he rolled down the window. "Hazel," he called, "be careful getting home, okay?" She nodded and waved as they drove away, then stood on the sidewalk for a moment, holding her warm container of food and feeling something she hadn't experienced in a long time. The possibility that tomorrow might bring something good. Neither child could have predicted that this brief encounter would be the beginning of a friendship that would change both their lives in ways that went far beyond anything either family could imagine. As Hazel walked the 6 blocks to her apartment building, she thought about Connor's sad eyes and quiet voice, wondering if there might be ways to help someone feel less lonely, even when you didn't have much to offer yourself. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ask her mother about the best ways to be a friend to someone who was different from herself. Marcus Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 36th floor office, watching the city lights blur as exhaustion weighed on his eyelids. At 34, he looked older. Stress and sleepless nights had carved lines around his eyes and threaded silver through his dark hair. The prescription bottle on his desk contained mild anxiety medication that he rarely took, preferring to handle his struggles through work and the hope that staying busy would eventually heal the wounds that time seemed unable to touch. 18 months had passed since the accident that killed his wife, Rebecca, and left Connor with partial paralysis in his legs. The doctors at Children's Hospital had been cautiously optimistic. Connor's spinal injury was incomplete, meaning he retained some sensation and the potential for improvement with intensive therapy. But trauma, they'd learned, affected more than just bodies. Connor's physical therapy showed minimal progress, not because his body couldn't heal, but because his spirit seemed unwilling to try. He participated in sessions without enthusiasm, completed exercises mechanically, and showed no interest in the adaptive equipment that could help him become more independent. Connor asked about the girl from the restaurant again today. Mrs. Patterson, his son's caregiver, had reported that afternoon. 3rd time this week. He wanted to know if she had a warm place to sleep. Marcus rubbed his temples, thinking about their strange encounter 3 days ago. In the 18 months since Rebecca's death, Connor had barely spoken to strangers and showed little interest in anything beyond his immediate needs. Yet a brief conversation with a homeless child had sparked more engagement than months of professional therapy. His desk phone buzzed. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Sarah Kim from Connor's therapy team is on line 1. Marcus straightened. Dr. Kim was the pediatric psychologist they'd been working with to address Connor's emotional barriers to recovery. Dr. Kim. Marcus, I wanted to follow up on our session with Connor yesterday. He mentioned meeting a girl who understands about things being hard. He seemed more animated talking about this encounter than I've seen him in our previous sessions. A homeless child we met outside a restaurant. They only talked for a few minutes. Sometimes that's all it takes. Connor's been dealing with what we call survivor's guilt, feeling responsible for surviving when his mother didn't. Meeting another child facing genuine hardship might help him gain perspective on his own situation. Marcus felt a familiar pang of frustration. So, you're saying my son needs to be around poverty to appreciate what he has? Not at all. I'm saying he might benefit from seeing how other children cope with challenges. Connor's been surrounded by adults trying to fix him. This girl represents something different, a peer who isn't trying to change him, just accepting him as he is. What are you suggesting? If it's possible to arrange another encounter under safe, supervised conditions, it might help Connor reconnect with the world outside his trauma. After ending the call, Marcus sat in the gathering darkness of his office, considering options he'd never imagined. How did one safely arrange for a wealthy child to befriend a homeless one? His security team could locate the girl easily enough, but approaching her family would require careful consideration. The elevator chimed, and his assistant announced that Connor was asking for him. Marcus found his son in the building's executive daycare area, where he spent afternoons when not in therapy. "Dad?" Can we go back to that restaurant? Not to eat, Connor added quickly. Just to see if Hazel is okay. You've been thinking about her a lot. Connor nodded seriously. She was by herself in the cold, and she was hungry, but she wasn't mean or sad in the bad way. She was just real. What do you mean by real? Everyone here is always asking how I'm feeling and trying to make me happy, but she just talked to me like a regular person. She didn't care about my wheelchair or ask about my legs. Marcus knelt beside his son's chair, struck by this insight. Would you like to see her again? Could we maybe help her somehow, like if she needs food or warm clothes? That's very thoughtful of you. Let me see what I can find out about her situation. The next morning, Marcus instructed his security team to discreetly locate the girl and her family. He was careful to emphasize that this was about ensuring Connor's new friend was safe, not about investigating them for any wrongdoing. The report arrived 2 days later and painted a picture that was both better and worse than Marcus had feared. Sarah Williams, age 32, single mother working 2 jobs to support herself and her daughter Hazel. They lived in transitional housing for families escaping homelessness, and while their situation was stable, it was precarious. What caught Marcus's attention was Sarah's work history. She'd been employed at several tech companies over the past 18 months, always in temporary or contract positions, despite having impressive qualifications as a software engineer. It was unusual for someone with her skills to struggle with employment stability. More intriguing was a gap in her employment history that coincided almost exactly with the time of his family's accident. Marcus had learned to trust his businessman's instincts about patterns and coincidences. There was something about this timing that deserved investigation, though he couldn't yet identify what. But first, Connor's well-being took priority over his curiosity about the mother's background. "I want to help them," Connor announced that evening over dinner, not in a way that makes them feel bad, but like how friends help each other. What kind of help were you thinking about? Maybe we could invite Hazel to do something fun. Like go to the children's museum or ice skating or... Connor paused. Well, maybe not ice skating for me, but something where we could just hang out. Marcus marveled at his son's growing animation. I think that sounds like a wonderful idea, but we need to be careful to approach this respectfully. Hazel's mother might be cautious about strangers wanting to help, because she doesn't know we're good people yet. Exactly. So how do we show her we're good people? Marcus considered this challenge. How did a wealthy man approach a struggling family without seeming patronizing or potentially threatening? The power imbalance was enormous, and Sarah Williams had every reason to be suspicious of their motives. We start small, he decided. Tomorrow after your therapy session, we'll go back to that restaurant. If we see Hazel, we'll simply say hello. No gifts, no offers of help, just a normal, friendly conversation. And if she seems okay with us, then we can ask if she wants to be actual friends. Something like that. Connor's smile was the brightest Marcus had seen since before the accident. Dad, I think I want to try harder at physical therapy. If Hazel and I are going to be friends, I want to be able to keep up with her better. That night, as Marcus tucked Connor into bed, his son said something that stopped him cold. Dad, I think Mom would like Hazel. She's brave like Mom was. Marcus felt tears threaten his composure. Connor rarely mentioned Rebecca anymore, as if speaking of her made the loss too real. But tonight, he was connecting his new friend to positive memories of his mother. I think you're right, Marcus managed. Mom always loved brave people, especially kids who were kind to others. As he turned off Connor's light, Marcus realized that whatever this friendship would become, it was already giving his son something that months of therapy hadn't, a reason to want to engage with the world again. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something that could change both families' lives, though Marcus had no idea how dramatically their worlds were about to intersect in ways that went far beyond a simple childhood friendship. The investigation into Sarah Williams would soon reveal connections that would force Marcus to confront truths about his family's accident that he wasn't prepared to handle. Sarah Williams balanced her laptop on her knees in the narrow space between their twin bed and the small table that served as both desk and dining surface in their studio apartment. At 32, she looked older than her years. The stress of single motherhood and financial instability had etched worry lines around her green eyes and left her thin frame even more fragile-looking. It was nearly midnight, and she was trying to finish a freelance programming project while Hazel slept beside her, but concentration proved impossible. For the third night running, Hazel had fallen asleep talking about the boy in the wheelchair she'd met outside Romano's restaurant. Her daughter's concern for a stranger touched Sarah's heart, but it also triggered an anxiety she couldn't quite name. "Mommy, what if Connor gets too cold in his wheelchair?" Hazel had asked before bed. "Does he have warm blankets? Does someone make sure he's not scared at night?" Sarah had provided gentle reassurance while privately worrying about her daughter's tender heart. Hazel had always been empathetic to the point of taking on others' pain as her own. A beautiful quality that also made her vulnerable in a world that often seemed cruel. Sarah closed her laptop and rubbed her tired eyes. Tomorrow, she started a new temporary assignment at a medical device company, the fourth job this year. Her resume was strong: a computer science degree from a respected university, 5 years of experience in software engineering before Hazel was born, and several successful projects during her attempts to re-enter the field. Yet somehow, permanent positions always seemed to slip away just when she thought she'd found stability. She suspected the real problem was the gap in her employment history. 18 months ago, she'd left her position at Blackwood Industries under circumstances she still couldn't fully explain, even to herself. The official reason was restructuring, but Sarah knew the truth was more complicated and more damaging to her career prospects. The memory of that last day still haunted her. She'd been working as a software engineer on the team developing driver assistance technology, not fully autonomous vehicles, but advanced safety systems that could help prevent accidents. Her specific project involved collision detection algorithms that would automatically apply brakes when sensors detected imminent crashes. The technology was promising but imperfect. During testing, Sarah had identified several scenarios where the system could malfunction, potentially making accidents worse rather than preventing them. She documented these issues and recommended additional testing before the system went to market. David Fletcher, her supervisor, had disagreed. The problems she'd identified were edge cases, he argued, unusual circumstances that were unlikely to occur in real-world driving. The marketing team was already making promises to automotive manufacturers, and delaying the launch would cost millions in lost contracts. "You're overthinking this, Sarah," Fletcher had said in their final meeting. "Perfect is the enemy of good. We fix the major issues and address minor ones in updates." But Sarah's concerns weren't minor. She'd run simulations showing that under specific weather conditions, heavy rain combined with certain lighting, the system could mistake a stationary object for a moving one, causing the car to accelerate instead of brake. She'd pressed her concerns, insisting that more testing was needed. Fletcher had grown impatient, then hostile. When Sarah threatened to escalate her concerns to senior management, Fletcher had made it clear that her continued employment depended on her willingness to be a team player. Within a week, Sarah found herself caught in a restructuring that eliminated her position while leaving her colleagues untouched. Her severance package included a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that legally prevented her from discussing any proprietary technology or safety concerns with outside parties. Sarah had signed the agreement because she needed the money and because Fletcher had made it clear that refusing would result in legal action that could destroy her career permanently. With a young daughter to support and no family to fall back on, she'd made the choice that still haunted her. But she'd kept copies of everything: her test results, her safety reports, her documentation of the meetings where Fletcher had pressured her to remain silent. Not because she planned to use them, but because throwing them away felt like erasing the proof that she'd tried to do the right thing. Now, 18 months later, she worked temporary jobs and freelance projects, never quite achieving the financial stability that would let her and Hazel move beyond transitional housing. Every rejection email felt like another consequence of Fletcher's sabotage, though she could never prove the connection. A soft knock at the door startled her from these dark thoughts. Sarah checked the peephole and saw Mrs. Garcia, the night manager of their housing complex. "Sarah, sorry to bother you so late. There's a gentleman downstairs asking about you and Hazel. Says he needs to speak with you about something important." Sarah's blood ran cold. Late-night visits from strangers never brought good news, and her first thought was that something had happened to her mother, the only family she had left. Did he give his name? "Marcus Blackwood. Says his son met Hazel recently, and he wanted to make sure she was okay." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. Marcus Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, her former employer, the man whose family had been involved in a terrible accident just months after she'd been forced to sign that non-disclosure agreement. She'd followed the news coverage of the accident with growing horror. Rebecca Blackwood killed, their young son Connor left partially paralyzed. The investigation had blamed driver error and weather conditions, but Sarah had immediately thought of her suppressed safety reports. She'd agonized for weeks about whether to come forward, to risk breaking her NDA to share information that might be relevant to understanding what had happened. But Fletcher's legal threats had held her back, and eventually the investigation closed without her input. Now Marcus Blackwood was at her door, asking about Hazel. "Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes," Sarah managed, her voice barely steady. She quickly checked that Hazel was sleeping soundly, grabbed her jacket, and headed downstairs with her heart hammering against her ribs. Marcus Blackwood waited in the small lobby, looking starkly out of place in his expensive overcoat among the worn furniture and fluorescent lighting. He was younger than she'd expected from news photos, but his face bore the drawn, exhausted look of someone carrying heavy burdens. "Ms. Williams," he said, standing as she approached. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I'm Marcus Blackwood." "I know who you are." Sarah's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. "What do you want with my daughter?" If Marcus was surprised by her hostile tone, he didn't show it. "My son Connor met Hazel outside Romano's restaurant a few days ago. It was the first time since his accident that he's shown interest in connecting with anyone new. I wanted to make sure Hazel was safe and to ask if it might be possible for them to meet again under more appropriate circumstances." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of recognition or suspicion. But Marcus seemed genuinely focused on his son's well-being, not on investigating her background. Appropriate circumstances, supervised visits, perhaps at a park or museum where they could spend time together safely. Connor has been asking about her constantly, whether she has warm clothes, enough food, a safe place to sleep. And you thought the solution was to track down her address and show up at her home at midnight. Marcus had the grace to look embarrassed. "You're right. This approach was poorly thought out. I should have tried to arrange contact through the restaurant, or honestly, I don't know the right way to handle this situation. I've never dealt with anything like it before." Because you've never had to think about how intimidating it might be for a struggling single mother to have a billionaire CEO show up demanding access to her child. "Yes," Marcus said simply. You're absolutely right, and I apologize. I'm not handling this well." His honest acknowledgement of his mistakes caught Sarah off guard. She'd expected arrogance or dismissiveness, not this straightforward admission of error. "Why is this so important to you?" she asked. "Because Connor hasn't smiled genuinely in 18 months, because he's barely spoken to anyone outside our immediate circle since the accident. Because in 5 minutes of conversation with your daughter, he showed more engagement with the world than he has in months of therapy." Sarah felt her hostility wavering. Whatever complex history existed between her and Blackwood Industries, this man was clearly a father desperate to help his child heal. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Any playdates. Somewhere public and safe where Connor and Hazel could spend time together. No pressure, no expectations, beyond letting two children who seem to connect have the chance to be friends." "And what do you expect from me and Hazel in return?" Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Nothing. This isn't a transaction. Connor needs a friend, and Hazel seems like a remarkable child who might benefit from having someone her own age to spend time with." Despite her reservations, Sarah found herself considering the possibility. Hazel had been talking non-stop about Connor, clearly concerned about his well-being. And Sarah knew firsthand how isolating their current circumstances could be for a 7-year-old. "I would need to meet Connor first," she said finally, "and any meetings would need to be in public places, with me present." "Of course. And Mr. Blackwood, if this is some kind of investigation into my background or attempt to—" "It's not," Marcus interrupted. "I give you my word that this is only about two children who seem to have connected, nothing else." Sarah studied his face one more time, looking for deception. What she saw instead was exhaustion, hope, and the particular desperation that belonged to parents who would do anything to help their children heal. "Okay," she said finally, "we can try it." Relief flooded Marcus's features. "Thank you. Would this Saturday work? Perhaps at Riverside Park around 2 p.m. "We'll be there." As Marcus headed for the door, he paused and turned back. "Ms. Williams, thank you. I know this is unconventional, and I appreciate you giving Connor this chance." After he left, Sarah sat in the lobby for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Marcus Blackwood, the man whose family had been destroyed by technology she'd helped create and failed to protect, had just asked her to help his son heal. The irony was almost unbearable. Here was her chance to do something positive for the Blackwood family, to perhaps balance the scales for her failure to prevent their tragedy. But it also meant getting closer to people she'd wronged, even if they didn't know it yet. As she headed back upstairs to their small apartment, Sarah carried the weight of secrets that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Saturday would mark the beginning of something that could heal two children's hearts, or potentially destroy what little stability she'd managed to build for herself and Hazel. The Saturday afternoon sun filtered through the bare branches of Riverside Park as Sarah walked slowly beside Connor's wheelchair, watching Hazel chase geese near the pond with the fearless enthusiasm only children possessed. It had been 3 weeks since that first awkward meeting, and what had begun as tentative supervised visits had evolved into something resembling genuine friendship. Connor had improved remarkably during this time, though Sarah knew better than to attribute it entirely to Hazel's influence. His physical therapy sessions were showing real progress. He could flex his ankles consistently now and had regained some sensation in his lower legs. More importantly, the hollow sadness that had marked his features during their first meeting was gradually being replaced by something that looked like hope. "Tell me about the dragon again," Connor said to Hazel as she returned from her goose-chasing expedition, slightly out of breath but grinning. "Okay, but remember, this is the story my grandma told me before she died," Hazel said, settling cross-legged on the ground beside his wheelchair. There was this dragon who lost his fire in a big storm, and everyone in the village was afraid of him because they thought dragons without fire were dangerous. Sarah smiled as she listened to her daughter weave the familiar tale. Hazel had inherited her grandmother's gift for storytelling, turning simple narratives into epic adventures that could hold listeners spellbound. Marcus sat on the bench nearby, reviewing emails on his phone, but clearly listening to every word. Over the past few weeks, Sarah had learned to read his moods, the way his shoulders relaxed when Connor laughed, the tension that crept into his jaw when he thought about work pressures, the particular stillness that came over him when Connor mentioned his mother. But then a little girl who was lost in the forest found the dragon crying, Hazel continued, and instead of running away, she asked why he was so sad. Because he thought he was broken, Connor supplied, having heard this story several times. Right! But the little girl explained that losing something doesn't make you broken, it just makes you different, and sometimes different can be better. Sarah felt Marcus's attention sharpen at these words. They'd discovered that Hazel had an uncanny ability to address Connor's deepest fears through seemingly innocent stories and observations. So what happened? Connor asked, though he knew the ending. The dragon learned that even without fire he could still fly, and he could use his wings to help lost people find their way home, and the little girl learned that helping someone else find their magic helps you find yours too. Connor nodded thoughtfully. I'd like that story because the dragon doesn't get his fire back, but he still gets to be helpful. Exactly, Hazel beamed. My grandma said the best stories aren't about going back to how things were. They're about finding new ways to be amazing. Sarah noticed Marcus had stopped pretending to read his emails. These conversations between the children often contained wisdom that seemed to speak directly to his own struggles with accepting Connor's changed circumstances. Dad, Connor said suddenly, I've been thinking about something Dr. Kim said about me maybe being ready to try the standing therapy again. Marcus looked up, surprised. Connor had refused to attempt standing exercises for months, insisting they were pointless since he couldn't walk anyway. Are you sure? We don't have to rush anything. I know, but... Connor glanced at Hazel, then back at his father. Hazel showed me her sketchbook yesterday, and there's this drawing she made of us at the park, except in the picture I'm standing up next to her by the pond. Sarah's heart clenched. She remembered that drawing. Hazel had worked on it for hours, carefully depicting a world where Connor could stand beside her to feed the ducks. I want to try to make that picture real, Connor said quietly, not because I think I have to walk to be Hazel's friend, but because I think maybe I'm ready to see what my body can do now. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. We can call Dr. Kim on Monday and set up a session. Actually, Connor continued, I was wondering if maybe Hazel could come with me sometime. Not to watch the therapy stuff, but to hang out after. Like if I work really hard at trying to stand, then we could celebrate by getting ice cream or something. Sarah felt Marcus's gaze on her, seeking permission for this expanded involvement in Connor's medical care. I think that sounds like a wonderful motivation, she said carefully. As long as Dr. Kim thinks it's appropriate. Hazel clapped her hands excitedly. Connor, even if your legs decide they're not ready to stand yet, you're still brave for trying, and we can still get ice cream to celebrate being brave. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced in months. Watching Hazel and Connor's easy friendship, seeing how Connor's laughter came more freely each week, observing Marcus gradually shed the rigid control that had marked their early interactions. All of it felt like a gift she hadn't expected to receive. But beneath this growing comfort lay a persistent anxiety that grew stronger each week. The better she got to know Marcus and Connor, the more devastating her secret felt. These weren't distant figures from news reports anymore. They were real people who'd invited her family into their lives with genuine warmth and trust. Marcus had never mentioned her previous employment at Blackwood Industries, though she'd noticed him occasionally studying her with a thoughtfulness that suggested he was trying to place something familiar. His security team had undoubtedly run background checks, but they might not have connected her maiden name to her current identity, or they might have dismissed the employment overlap as coincidental. "Sarah," Marcus said, approaching while the children were absorbed in feeding crackers to the ducks, "I wanted to ask you something." Her heart rate spiked. "Yes?" "Connor's birthday is next month. He's turning 7, and he's specifically requested that Hazel be invited to his party. I know that might feel overwhelming given the difference in our circumstances, but I wanted to ask before making any plans." Relief flooded through her. "That's very sweet. I'm sure Hazel would love to celebrate with Connor. It won't be a big party, just family and a few close friends, but I wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable. The last thing I want is for either of you to feel out of place." Sarah was touched by his consideration. "We'd be honored to be included." "There's something else," Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly. "I've been thinking about your work situation. Connor mentioned that you're always tired because you work multiple jobs. And Hazel has mentioned that you're looking for something more stable." Sarah tensed. "Marcus, if this is about charity—" "It's not. It's about the fact that Blackwood Industries is always looking for talented software engineers, and from what I've observed, you clearly have technical skills that are being underutilized in temporary positions." The irony was staggering. Marcus Blackwood was offering her a job at the company that had destroyed her career to cover up safety concerns that had contributed to his family's tragedy. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think that would be appropriate given our personal connection through the kids. Actually, I think it might be exactly what makes it appropriate. You understand the importance of what we do because you've seen firsthand how technology affects real families. That perspective is valuable." Sarah struggled to find a response that wouldn't reveal too much. "I'd need to think about it." "Of course, there's no pressure. I just wanted you to know the option exists." As they prepared to leave the park that afternoon, Connor successfully transferred from his wheelchair to the bench beside Hazel, supporting himself with his arms while she showed him her latest drawings. It was a small victory, but Sarah could see how much it meant to both children. "Look, Daddy," Connor called. "I can sit like a regular person." Marcus's smile was radiant. "I see that. You're getting stronger every day." As they said their goodbyes, Hazel hugged Connor carefully, a ritual they'd developed over their weeks of friendship. "See you Tuesday?" she asked. "Definitely. And Hazel, thank you for being my friend even when I couldn't do fun stuff." "Thank you for being my friend, even when I don't have nice clothes or a big house." Sarah felt tears threaten her composure. These children had found something pure and uncomplicated in each other. A friendship based on acceptance rather than circumstance. Walking home that evening, Hazel chatted excitedly about Connor's progress and his upcoming birthday party. But Sarah's mind was elsewhere, wrestling with the growing weight of her deception. Marcus's job offer had forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. She couldn't continue this friendship indefinitely while hiding her connection to their family's tragedy. Eventually, the truth would emerge, either through her confession or through someone else's investigation. And when it did, she would lose not only her own tentative stability, but also Hazel's precious friendship with Connor. That night, as Hazel slept peacefully beside her, Sarah made a decision that terrified her. She would tell Marcus the truth, not at Connor's birthday party, which should remain joyful, but soon after. She owed him honesty, even if it cost her everything. But first, she needed to prepare Hazel for the possibility that their new happiness might be temporary, and that sometimes doing the right thing meant risking the loss of everything you'd come to cherish. Connor's 7th birthday party was everything a child could dream of. A sunny April afternoon in the Blackwood family's backyard, complete with a bounce house, face painting, and an elaborate treasure hunt that had been modified so Connor could participate fully from his wheelchair. Sarah watched from a patio chair as Hazel and Connor worked together to solve riddles and find hidden prizes, their laughter ringing across the manicured lawn. "They make a good team," said Elena Blackwood, Marcus's mother, settling into the chair beside Sarah with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Connor hasn't had a real friend since before the accident. We were starting to worry he'd forgotten how to just be a kid." Sarah accepted the lemonade gratefully. "Hazel adores him. She talks about Connor constantly, his progress in therapy, his funny jokes, his kindness to everyone around him." "And what about you?" Eleanor asked with the direct curiosity that seemed to run in the Blackwood family. "How are you managing everything? Marcus mentioned you're working multiple jobs while raising Hazel alone." "We're doing okay," Sarah said carefully. "It's challenging, but we're stable." "Stable is relative," Elena observed. "I raised Marcus mostly alone after his father died when he was 12. I know what it's like to carry everything by yourself." Sarah felt an unexpected kinship with this elegant woman who spoke about struggle with matter-of-fact honesty. "Marcus offered me a position at Blackwood Industries," Sarah said, surprising herself by bringing up the topic. "I'm not sure it would be appropriate." "Because of the children's friendship?" "Partly, and partly because—" Sarah hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. "I actually worked there briefly a couple of years ago. It didn't end well." Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. "What department?" "Software engineering, driver assistance technology." Something shifted in Elena's expression, a sharpening of attention that made Sarah immediately regret her honesty. "What was your maiden name?" Elena asked quietly. "Chen. Sarah Chen." Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching Connor and Hazel as they celebrated finding a particularly well-hidden treasure. "You left just after Rebecca and Connor's accident," Elena said finally. "It wasn't a question." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Yes. Marcus doesn't know, does he?" "No." Elena studied Sarah's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Why didn't you tell him?" "Because I was afraid he'd blame me for not doing more to prevent what happened. Because I was afraid he'd think I was using Connor to get close to your family for some ulterior motive. Because—" Sarah's voice broke slightly. "Because I'm a coward who's been hiding from the consequences of her own failures for 18 months. "Tell me what really happened," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. So Sarah did. Sitting in the afternoon sunshine while their children played nearby, she told Eleanor everything. About the safety concerns she'd identified, about Fletcher's pressure to stay quiet, about the NDA that had trapped her in silence even after the accident occurred. Elena listened without interruption, her face revealing nothing until Sarah finished speaking. "You tried to do the right thing," Elena said finally, "and you were punished for it. But I didn't try hard enough. I could have gone to the media, could have risked the legal consequences. Instead, I protected myself and my daughter while other families were put at risk." "Other families?" "Sarah, that technology was recalled 6 months after the accident. Marcus pushed for an internal review when he learned about other incidents with similar circumstances. The recall affected thousands of vehicles." Sarah stared at her. "I didn't know, I thought. You thought Marcus had covered it up? I thought the company had. I assumed Marcus either didn't know about the technical issues or chose to ignore them." Eleanor shook her head. "Marcus discovered the problems during his own investigation into what happened to his family. But by then, the engineer who'd originally identified the concerns was long gone, and the documentation had been sanitized." Fletcher destroyed my reports. Apparently. When Marcus finally located the original safety data, it had been heavily redacted. He spent months trying to track down the engineer who'd done the initial analysis. Sarah felt the world tilting around her. He was looking for me. He was looking for Sarah Chen. He never connected her to Sarah Williams, single mother of his son's best friend. They sat in silence, watching Connor attempt to stand from his wheelchair to reach a treasure chest that had been placed deliberately within his therapeutic range. With Hazel's encouragement and his own determination, he managed to hold himself upright for nearly 30 seconds, a remarkable achievement. "He's doing so much better," Elena observed. "The physical therapists say his progress has accelerated dramatically in the past month. Hazel has that effect on people. She makes you want to be the best version of yourself." "And what about you, Sarah? What version of yourself do you want to be?" The question hit harder than Elena probably intended. Someone who doesn't run from difficult truths. Someone who protects her daughter without compromising her integrity. Someone who... Sarah paused, watching Connor and Hazel high-five each other over his successful treasure retrieval. Someone who deserves to be part of something this good. "Then tell him," Eleanor said simply. "Tell Marcus the truth. And lose all of this? Or gain something even better? You can't build a real relationship, friendship, professional or otherwise, on a foundation of secrets. And Marcus deserves to know that the person he's been searching for has been right here, helping his son heal." Before Sarah could respond, Connor and Hazel came running over, Connor moving in his wheelchair, but using his legs to help propel himself forward in a way he hadn't been able to do weeks earlier. "Mom! Sarah!" Connor called excitedly. "Look what we found in the last treasure chest!" He held up a wooden puzzle box that required multiple steps to open. "Grandma Elena says it belonged to my mum when she was little. She wanted me to have it for my birthday." "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Elena said, her voice slightly emotional. "Your mother loved puzzles. She always said the best treasures were the ones you had to work to unlock." Connor and Hazel spent the next hour working together to solve the puzzle box, their heads bent close together as they discussed strategy and celebrated each small breakthrough. When they finally opened it, they found a small crystal inside that caught the afternoon light and cast rainbow patterns across the patio. "It's like magic," Hazel breathed. "Mom always said crystals hold light until you're ready to see it," Connor said, clearly repeating something he'd been told about his mother. "Maybe that's why it was locked away, so the light would be extra bright when we found it." Sarah felt tears threatening her composure. These children had an uncanny ability to find profound meaning in simple moments. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus approached Sarah while Connor and Hazel played one final game together. "Thank you for making this day so special for Connor," he said. "Having Hazel here made all the difference. Thank you for including us. This is the happiest I've seen Hazel since." Sarah paused, realizing she'd almost said, "since before we lost everything. Since we moved to the city." "She didn't have many friends in our old neighborhood." Marcus nodded, accepting this partial truth. "Sarah, I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the job opportunity. I know you said you needed to think about it, but I hope you'll consider it seriously. Connor's progress has been remarkable since you and Hazel became part of our lives, and I think that perspective, understanding how our work affects real families, would be invaluable to our engineering teams." Sarah looked across the yard at Connor and Hazel, still absorbed in their crystal and the patterns of light it created. "Marcus, there's something I need to tell you about my work history, about why I left Blackwood Industries, about..." She took a deep breath. "About why our paths crossing might not be the coincidence it seems." Something in her tone made Marcus focus completely on her face. "What do you mean? Not here, not today. Connor's birthday should stay perfect, but soon, We need to talk, and there are things you deserve to know." Marcus studied her expression, clearly sensing the gravity behind her words. "Is everything okay? Are you and Hazel safe?" "We're safe, but there are truths I should have shared weeks ago, and I can't keep hiding from them." "Then we'll talk, tomorrow, if you're ready." Sarah nodded, feeling both relief and terror at finally committing to honesty. As they gathered their things to leave, Connor insisted on giving Hazel one final hug. "Thank you for making my birthday the best day ever," he said seriously. "And Hazel, whatever happens, you'll always be my best friend, okay?" "Always," Hazel promised, though she looked confused by the intensity of Connor's words. Walking home that evening, Sarah realized that Connor's instinctive understanding of the fragility of good things probably came from having lost so much already. Tomorrow, when she told Marcus the truth, Connor might lose the stability and happiness he'd worked so hard to regain. But Elena was right. Real relationships couldn't be built on deception, no matter how well-intentioned. It was time to trust that love and truth were stronger than fear and shame, even when the stakes felt impossibly high. Marcus sat across from Sarah in the small conference room at Blackwood Industries, the very building where she'd once worked and where their family's tragedy had unknowingly begun. It was Monday evening, long after regular business hours, and the empty offices around them felt heavy with the weight of secrets about to be revealed. Sarah had requested this setting, saying she needed to be in the place where it all started in order to tell the story properly. Now, looking at Marcus's patient but concerned expression, she understood why confession was considered both sacrament and terror. "I worked here under my maiden name, Sarah Chen," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was part of the team developing driver assistance technology, specifically the collision detection system that was installed in your car." Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to sharp attention. "You were part of that project?" "I was the lead engineer on the collision detection algorithm, and 3 days before your accident, I identified a critical flaw in the system." The silence that followed felt like falling. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his business mind clearly processing implications, while his father's heart grappled with what this might mean. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. Sarah opened the folder she'd brought, copies of test results, safety reports, and email correspondence she'd preserved despite the NDA. The system worked perfectly under normal conditions. But when heavy rain combined with specific lighting conditions, the sensors could misread stationary objects as moving vehicles, causing the car to accelerate instead of brake. She showed him the test data, the simulation results, the detailed analysis she'd prepared 18 months ago. "I documented everything and planned to recommend delaying the launch until we could resolve the issue. But David Fletcher shut me down. He said the conditions I'd identified were too unlikely to occur in real-world driving, that delaying the launch would cost millions in contracts with auto manufacturers. When I insisted the risk was too significant to ignore, he made it clear my job depended on being a team player." Marcus studied the documents with the focused intensity she remembered from news coverage of his business dealings. "This simulation data. It shows exactly the conditions that existed the night of our accident. Heavy rain, oncoming headlights, a stalled vehicle ahead. Yes. And you tried to report this?" "I tried. But within a week, I was caught in a restructuring that eliminated only my position. My severance included an NDA that legally prevented me from discussing the technology or safety concerns with anyone outside the company." Marcus was quiet for a long time, reading through her documentation with the thoroughness of someone who understood both the technical and legal implications. "Why didn't you come forward after the accident?" he asked finally. "NDA or not, this information could have been crucial to understanding what happened." Sarah had dreaded this question because it forced her to confront her own cowardice. Because Fletcher made it clear that breaking the NDA would result in legal action that would destroy my career and leave me unable to support Hazel. Because I was terrified and alone, and convinced that coming forward wouldn't bring your wife back or help Connor walk again. But you kept all of this. Marcus gestured to the document spread between them. Because throwing it away felt like erasing the proof that I'd tried to do the right thing, even if I failed to follow through. Marcus stood and walked to the window overlooking the city, his shoulders rigid with tension she couldn't interpret. Was he angry, devastated, planning legal retaliation? "Sarah," he said without turning around, "do you know what I've been living with for 18 months? I can imagine." "No, you can't." His voice was sharp, but not cruel. "I've been living with the certainty that I killed my wife through my own incompetence. The accident report blamed driver error, said I accelerated instead of braking when I saw the stalled car. For 18 months, I've believed that my momentary panic or confusion cost Rebecca her life and left Connor paralyzed." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." "You're sorry?" He turned to face her, and she was shocked to see that his expression wasn't angry, it was relieved. "Sarah, you just gave me back my sanity. You just proved that I didn't kill my wife through my own stupidity. But if I'd fought harder to report the problem?" "If you'd fought harder, Fletcher would have destroyed your career earlier, and the system still would have gone to market. The only difference is that Connor would have grown up without Hazel's friendship, and I never would have learned the truth about what really happened." Marcus returned to his chair, leaning forward with an intensity that reminded Sarah why he'd become so successful in business. "Tell me about Fletcher. Is he still with the company?" "I don't know. I've been too afraid to research what happened to anyone from that team. He was promoted to senior vice president 6 months after your departure. He's been overseeing all safety protocols for our automotive partnerships." The implications of this hit Sarah like a physical blow. "He's still in a position to suppress safety concerns?" "He was." Past tense. Marcus's smile was sharp and professional. "Because as of tomorrow morning, David Fletcher will be suspended pending a comprehensive investigation into his handling of safety protocols, and every automotive system we've licensed will be subject to immediate third-party safety review." "What about the NDA?" "If I violated it by telling you, NDAs can't legally prevent disclosure of information related to public safety violations or potential crimes. Fletcher's suppression of your safety reports constitutes corporate fraud at minimum. You're protected as a whistleblower, not prosecuted as a contract violator." Sarah felt a weight she'd carried for 18 months begin to lift from her shoulders. "What happens now?" "Now we fix everything that can be fixed. The flawed systems get recalled and replaced. Fletcher faces legal consequences for his decisions. You get your career back, not as charity, but as recognition that your work was correct and valuable and should have been heard the first time." "And Connor? Hazel? How do I explain to them that their friendship began because I was too cowardly to tell the truth about your family's tragedy?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering this. "Maybe we tell them that sometimes the most important connections happen because people are brave enough to finally tell the truth, even when it's terrifying." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the research lab at Blackwood Industries, leading a team of engineers developing next-generation safety systems with unprecedented transparency protocols. The wall above her desk held 2 photos. One of Connor taking his first unassisted steps during a physical therapy session, and one of Hazel and Connor at the Science Museum, both wearing junior engineer badges from a robotics workshop. Connor's recovery had continued steadily, Not miraculous overnight healing, but consistent progress that doctors attributed to his improved emotional state and determination to keep up with his increasingly active best friend. He could now walk short distances with a walker and had regained enough leg function to participate in adaptive sports programs. More importantly, he'd regained the joy and curiosity that trauma had stolen from him. David Fletcher had pled guilty to corporate fraud and obstruction of justice, serving a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations into industry-wide safety cover-ups. The resulting reforms had prevented an estimated 12 serious accidents and saved countless lives. Sarah's testimony had been crucial not only to Fletcher's prosecution, but to new regulations requiring independent safety audits and protecting engineers who reported potential problems. "Sarah!" Connor's voice called from the lab entrance, where he stood with Hazel and Marcus, all three of them holding visitor badges. "Hey, you guys? What brings you to my work?" "We brought you lunch," Hazel announced, holding up a bag from their favorite sandwich shop. "And Connor wanted to see the new safety system you're building." As they ate together in the break room, Connor asked the kinds of detailed technical questions that reminded Sarah why he'd always been drawn to understanding how things worked. "So the new system talks to other cars to make sure they all know what's happening?" he asked. "Exactly. And if one car's sensors get confused by rain or lights, the other cars can share their information to help everyone make better decisions. Like friends helping each other see clearly when one of them is having trouble? That's a perfect way to put it." Hazel, who'd been quietly drawing while they talked, suddenly looked up with the serious expression that meant she was about to share something important. "Sarah, I'm glad you told the truth about the car computers, even though it was scary." "Why is that, sweetheart?" "Because now other kids won't get hurt like Connor did. And because Connor needed to know that his daddy didn't make the accident happen, it was the broken computer's fault." Connor nodded seriously. "It's better to know the real reason for sad things, even if the real reason makes you angry, because then you can fix the problem so it doesn't hurt other people." Sarah looked at these two remarkable children who taught her more about courage and healing than any adult in her life. "You're both absolutely right," she said, "and I'm grateful every day that you taught me it's never too late to be brave." As they walked back to the lab together, Connor moving confidently with his walker, Hazel chattering about her plans to become an engineer like Sarah, Marcus quiet but smiling, Sarah realized that the truth had indeed set them all free. Not free from the past, but free to build something better on the foundation of honesty, justice, and love that refused to be destroyed by temporary deception. The hug that had started their healing had grown into something none of them could have imagined. A friendship strong enough to survive truth, a family bond that transcended blood, and proof that sometimes the most beautiful endings grow from the courage to face the most difficult beginnings. Connor still couldn't run as fast as other children his age and might never fully recover from his injuries. Sarah still carried the weight of 18 months of lost time and hidden truth. Marcus still grieved his wife and the innocence his family had lost. But they'd learned that healing didn't require erasing the past. It required embracing the future with enough courage to love each other through whatever came next. And in a world that often felt broken beyond repair, that was perhaps the most miraculous ending of all.